times you've talked about the sort of the community aspect of it as well, and you mentioned it in something you'd written. You were talking more about the community building with teachers in terms of support, but you mentioned learners as well. And Alejandra, you specifically mentioned that one of your whys was network as well. So this is the difficult thing is, I know that Steve, you've been working a lot with the kind of hybrid teacher training, and the teachers I've been working with have been mostly kind of online, purely online learning. But I imagine that the issues are the same in that the social dimension of learning is totally different. And so trying to make sure that people are engaged or have opportunities to be engaged and feel seen as well, not just feel like a face in a window on the screen. A lot of teachers that I've been working with have reported that the windows are getting fewer as people just don't log on and kind of drop off. And, you know, it's trying to manage that sense of community. One aspect of that, Steve, is that you're talking about, you know, that the expectations are similar and that students want to get to know you. You know, they want to know the person behind the screen. I mean, what differences have you seen in either managing or experiencing the social dimension of learning this year?
Well, I think in the hybrid dimension, the important thing is not to see the hybrid aspect itself as two different communities, but to do everything possible to connect the people across the cyber divide. So what I do for the on-campus students is I get them to tune into the Zoom. And then when we do groups across the two dimensions. And so that means that every week the students are talking not just to their colleagues in class, which would be the easiest thing to do, but in fact, they're talking to people who are in different countries. And we try and spread the on-campus students out so that they're all talking with off-campus or online students. And I think that's really important because otherwise you're kind of saying to the on-campus students, okay, you talk to each other, and then the online students, well, you're over there, you just talk to each other. And I don't think that's good enough. I think, you know, bringing them together as much as possible is important. Also important at the beginning of every session, just spend some time as a human being asking them how they are. This is a really tough time for everybody. You know, many people have had direct experiences of COVID or other difficult situations this year. So just checking in, you know, last weekend I had some students moving to a new flat. So just following those things up. How are you doing? How was your move? What are you doing at the holiday? Are you traveling back home? You know, the same thing that you would do as any good teacher to show an interest in them as individuals, and also to share a little bit about what's going on with yourself, you know, as well as in the classes, talking about your own professional experience and sharing your own stories, but as a human being saying, yeah, this is quite tough for me as well. This situation has happened. I'm dealing with this too. And people then feeling that we are all in this together in one way or another. And you're doing your best to create that sense of community, regardless of where people are. And I think teachers, sometimes we can get a bit detached because of the technology. But I think we can still use our warmth and our compassion, regardless of whether the students are in front of us or if they're watching online, to really engage with them and to let them engage with us. But really important to let them engage with each other. I think that is the key for me.
Yeah, I would like to jump on that from my perspective, just taking a wider view on the different levels of education, because it's true that I chose executive education, so that's part of lifelong learning. But what about kids on the other side of the spectrum that didn't choose education? They are in it because of how life is built, what they need to discover, what parents want. And I think it's very different, to be able to answer that question, whether it's a sense of community and at the very end of the lifelong learning curve, or at the very beginning of the K-12 education, right? And once again, we have the why on the side of the spectrum, but on the other side, you don't have that why already inherited in those kids. So I think when we talk about community there, it's even more complicated for schools because they need to really bring in the families, whoever is the extended families as well, because how are the parents surviving, let's say, from this scenario, because the parents as well have been impacted. So not only you need to check on the kids, but you need to check on the parents. And I think that that's also really important to bring in the community. Also, some parents are working. So what's happening? The kids are staying with the grandparents, but then you need to check in the grandparents and their health. And it becomes a big system that the school becomes part of life way more than what it was before. But if the students are struggling because they are at an early age and they're just in front of a computer and their friends are just not reachable, you're missing one bit that we'll still have to see what's going to happen with that generation alpha in a few years. How are they going to behave? Because that changed them completely. I mean, yes, they're the YouTube generation, right? They see everything on a screen, but what's going to happen afterwards with the effects of this experience for them in 5-10 years? How are they going to be perceived in the market? What qualities are they going to have? What are the different traits that they will be developing from this resilience that at a very young age they have been creating? And how are they behaving as well with their parents? So I think the sense of community changes completely if we go to this lower spectrum of the learning curve. And with that in mind, we really need to adapt in a very different way, whether we're offering lifelong learning or we're offering K-12 education. And of course, higher ed sits in the middle, and everyone is trying to actually make it happen in a certain way. But I think there's a lot to learn from K-12 schools who had a really tough duty during this pandemic, and hopefully higher ed and executive education plus whatever is linked to certificates and lifelong learning can have as a learning from kids.
Yeah, that's a really important point, actually, that, you know, we're all generally involved in further and higher education, although Alejandra, I know that you work with, you know, K-12 schools and you know, education agents, things like that, so you've got a broader perspective. But I think we all at least know teachers who are involved in high school and primary, and I mean, there really is, if we want to talk about heroes right now, you know, the way that these guys have responded, and you know, what I've seen around me in my own sort of network, the way that people are dedicating themselves and dedicating their time to just being incredibly creative and responsive rather than reactive to the situation, and just it's quite incredible.